Most of us can fondly remember our first trip as a kid to a zoo or aquarium.
Are you loving the zoo?
What's your favorite part?
Everything!
Everything?
The smell!
The wonder of seeing wild creatures in person for the first time. The joy of interacting with them. Well, like I said, most of us can. Historically, the first ever recorded zoos date all the way back to 3500 BC, where excavations have revealed that wealthy Egyptian leaders kept large menageries of exotic animals. Zoos, naturally, have come a long way since then. Today, there are approximately 800,000 animals in the care of Association of Zoos and Aquariums accredited institutions across the US, all being cared for every day by thousands of people across America in a career that we know most as zookeepers. Growing up, I always knew our family had big ties to the zookeeping industry because of my grandfather. I'd hear bits of wild tales about his life, things like the time a tiger escaped an enclosure in Connecticut, having to duck giraffe heads under overpasses as they transported them to the newly opening San Diego Safari Park, and flying a black bear cub in the cabin of a 747. I'd heard fragments of these stories for years, pieces of a puzzle, but never the full picture. I knew my grandfather had been a longtime zookeeper at the San Diego Zoo, but what I didn't know, and would soon uncover, was that he was in truth one of the most important zookeepers in American history. I should probably show you all who my grandfather is to get the story started.
I'm gonna migrate.
Oh, back.
I feel like a damn penguin.
That's my grandfather, Richard, or as many knew him in life, Dick Sweeney. And let's just say that name was never lost on his colleagues.
I think somebody always told me you're supposed to tell a joke whenever you get up someplace, so I can only tell a dirty one. Dick Sweeney.
If you Google search Dick Sweeney Zookeeper, one of two pictures will come up. One being this adorable picture of him feeding the San Diego Zoo's first Bonsabog calf. The other being this, a picture of these 7 San Diego zookeepers back in 1967 as they started an organization called the American Association of Zookeepers. Just what is the AAZK, or as many zookeepers refer to it, AZAC? Honestly, when I first began this project, I couldn't fully explain what the organization did or why it was founded. Yet a quick Google search of the organization would show that nearly every professional zoo, from Omaha to Washington to San Diego, has a chapter. But what I didn't know was why my grandfather had started it. I didn't even fully understand what his job as a keeper involved, or how the world of animal care really worked. I did know that I wanted to find out though. Sadly, many of the founders of AZAC have since passed, but through many Google searches and phone calls, I've finally managed to track down the 2 living founders of AAZK, Ken Willingham and Conrad Grayson. If you're wondering which is which, according to Ken after my first phone call with him, Ken is the handsome one in the middle, and Conrad is the dork up front with his eyes closed. that quip providing an early sneak peek into just what kinds of characters these zookeepers were.
First time I went in the zoo, it was in 1942. I was 9 years old. My grandmother took me in. I finally went to work there in 1962. And I worked some of the animals that I saw as a kid. Some of the baboons and stuff like that. And started out 1962 at the zoo at $1.25 an hour.
Just about all of us were Vietnam veterans at the time, and we had some of them were from Korean War. So we were all mostly, especially back then, they still had the draft back then. So when you grew up like I grew up, you knew that you had to serve 6 years in the military if you're an American male. So I joined on my 17th birthday, and a lot of guys joined to get it out so they can go get a regular job and get the military service out of the way. So I'm out of the Marine Corps in 1962, they hired me, and I immediately went to work at the Children's Zoo. And I worked there, and I worked with my Hatari, which is a little Navy female African elephant that was named after the movie Hatari with John Wayne. And they gave her to us, and she was rambunctious. So I worked with her. I used to take her out for walks. And in 1967, I got to know Dick Sweeney, and he was working the camels, as I recall at the time, and also he was out in the Belt area with that Przewalski horses. I remember he worked in the Catskills, and they brought Przewalski horses over to the zoo, and he was the expert. And I said, wow, just a great guy, and we got along real good. And we were a bunch of goof-offs back then. We had a lot of jokes. A lot of us are veterans and like to play games on us. And at noontime, we'd always meet at one little place up in the Veld and have a poker game for about an hour during lunch. And we'd all play tricks on each other. So I remember getting a big glass of water, putting it on the door, knowing Dick would be coming through the door pretty soon. And sure as heck, Dick comes to the door and wham, we got him. And we do, silly kid stuff like that to each other. And we'd all laugh.
One time, my dad had brought home a pair of earrings for my mom, and he told her that they were wood, and she loved them. And they were, Mom didn't have pierced ears, so these were the screw back kind, a little hook that you had a little screw at the back to hold it against your ear. And she loved those things. She just thought they were the greatest things. And come to find out that they were petrified deer poop. She screamed at him probably for a good week about why she had to walk around wearing shit on her ears.
I honestly don't know what they enjoy more, taking care of the animals or just telling jokes on each other.
We had coffee down at the Cat Canyon at the concession stand there, and I noticed that when you work with bleach, it tears your khaki pants, So I noticed he had a little hole in it. I said, Dick, look, there's a little hole in your pants there. He says, wow. He says, you wouldn't make it in the Marine Corps. I says, come here, let me see this. And I put my fingers and I ripped his pants off. And he started pulling my hand. I ripped them, and all the rest of the guys were laughing. That's the kind of stuff we do.
They were the group behind the infamous attraction at the Wild Animal Park.
They called all the mammal keepers, a whole bunch of us, about 20 of us. You guys are going to be the first to ride this tram.
They had a big meeting out at the Wild Animal Park about stuff, and they were trying to come up with a name for that tram. And I think it was Chuck Faust that was doodling. And Clyde Hill says, what are you writing down there? And he says, who gives a shit anyway? And it was Wagasa. It sounded African. So they named it Wagasa Bushlight. And they didn't want Schroeder to know that's what it meant. I think Schroeder came out and said, well, what does Wagasa mean? And no one would tell it.
Apart from the jokes, these early San Diego keepers also all shared a deep love for the animals they cared for, something AAZK founders Conrad Grayson and Ken Willingham experienced early on caring for elephants. Ken recalled to me the story of how he won over an elephant many keepers were having trouble with.
So I would come in and sit down on the other side of the big bars and roll an apple to her and talk to her, and roll an apple to her and talk to her. I'd come back later in the day, roll an apple to her, and then later that night I'd come back and she'd come in the room. I'd put the food down for her through the big bar and close the door. And then I got to where she'd come back and forth, and I'd rub her trunk and everything, and it took several weeks to do that, and she was okay.
In the morning, out of routine, I'd go out in the yard, and they'd all come across. Some of them, all 8 of them, would come at me. They'd surround me. and they were sniffing at you. And I'd walk up and grab their trunks and go, and what you're doing is giving your scent to them. So you walk up and you grab their trunks and you blow them. And I learned that from Bob Weil. Bob Weil was the Ringling Brothers bull man for 20 years before he came to the San Diego Zoo. He knew elephants, and he taught me. And it's kind of scary to somebody that sees it, where you're in the middle and they surround you completely and you're grabbing trunks and you're talking to them. But what you do basically, they want to scent you. Who are you? That's how if you put a hat on, sunglasses, they'll come up to you and say, oh, that's Conrad. No, you smell.
I do remember Trib the gorilla, because Trib got transferred to the Wild Animal Park, and I went with my dad over to see the new Wild Animal Park, and he wanted to go and check and see how Trib was doing, and he hadn't seen Trib for a few months, and the moment we walked up to the enclosure, the gorilla immediately recognized him and got very excited to see him and pounding on his chest and jumping up and down. And I've never seen an animal react and knowing the keeper that took care of it. So it was really neat to see.
I was beginning to also learn that being a zookeeper in those days wasn't easy, especially in an era where many zoo enclosures lacked basic safety measures. The men who would go on to found the American Association of Zookeepers had all faced the dangers of working with wild animals up close and personal.
Some coffee with a guy named Jim Tuttle, and Jim Tuttle was a cat man. He was a big cat man. And what I did basically, I says, I would really like to work the big cats. He says, well, I'll tell you one thing. This was 2 weeks before he was killed. He says, basically, if you ever get loose and one of these cats gets loose, don't turn and run all the way, because they'll hit you right, and break your neck, So just take them head on. That was ironic when he told me this. 2 weeks later, Jet, one of our black leopards, males, he opened the wrong door, he jumped out, he ran, and he hit him, and he killed him. And so I ended up going to his job, and I worked from his job from 1965 to 1968, so 3 years, big cats. Because nobody wanted to work the cats because the keeper had been killed there. But I love the cats. And the sad part about Jet was a full-grown leopard. They have so many years in them. And he'd raised them as a cub. And to the point where you can't play with them. Last time, I got pictures where I'm holding jaguar cubs. But at a certain point, you have to separate some. I had a male lion that I raised named Lucifer, and Lucifer got to the point where he got half grown, about a teenage size, and I'd let him out, and I'd out there washing the ball, and he'd be chasing me around and having a good time because I'd raised him. And all of a sudden one day he runs over and charges, hits me, knocks me down, and tears my pants. I said, Lucifer, you're in trouble now. And all of a sudden I heard a voice coming from above, Dr. Schroeder, the director of the San Diego Zoo. Conrad, are you okay? I said, yeah, Lucifer just got a little carried away. He says, okay, are you sure you're okay? Yes, sir, I'll have to change my pants. Okay, and he walked away. Well, the principal keeper comes down there, he says, you don't go into Lucifer anymore, per Dr. Schroeder. He didn't say nothing. He just went back to the office, called in the principal keeper, and says, don't want Grayson working inside with that lion. So that's the thing with Jim Tuttle that was doing the same thing with Jet, who eventually killed him, because they get to the point there's a separation and they're no longer, they're a wild animal. And even though they may love you and this and that, but someday they may decide that you look like hamburger meat to me, So that's why you have to have a separation. But in the old cages, which were built in 1926, that's the way it was for so many years, And so I can imagine how dangerous that was. You always had to be alert. And for all those years I was a zookeeper, especially with the big cats, I would never go out and have more than one drink, because you didn't want to come to work with a hangover, not with the big cats, because you make one mistake and bang.
My family would also get a first-hand taste of the risks involved with working with wildlife not soon after this.
I believe he was taking someone around who was researching tapirs, and she had reached her hand into the enclosure to pat the tapir's nose, and it was like during the tapir mating season, so they were already pretty aggressive, and the tapir then grabbed a hold of her fingers, and Dad jumped in trying to get it off of her.
And then the tapir turned his attention to Dick, and I don't know if it got his leg first or got his arm, but it let go of the woman, and it had Dick really working him over.
He went up to protect his neck because an animal The first instinct of an animal is go for the groin, go for the neck, for the kill zones. So it had gone for Dad's groin. When it knocked him on the ground, he went up and tried to protect his neck, and it grabbed a chunk out of his arm.
And Clyde Hill jumped over in there to get the taper loose from Dick. And if Clyde Hill hadn't done that, I'm sure Dick may have gotten killed if that taper hit some arteries. So Clyde's trying to get that taper off of Dick. He had Dick by the arm at that point, and Clyde reached around to try to pry the taper jaws off of Dick. And when it did, it came down and bit the tips off of Clyde's fingers. And when it turned its attention to Clyde, they were able to get Dick out. But meanwhile, Clyde was in with the taper.
Mom was working as a nursing assistant at the hospital, and Mom got the call saying Dad was at the hospital, he'd been injured.
When he came home, I think it was 3, maybe 4 days later, he was laying on the bed, and Mom was changing his dressings, and I just remember seeing the gross open gaping wound and thinking, oh my God, this was really serious. The thing tried to kill him. So yeah, it was a scary time. It was very scary.
We were just happy to have our dad home, and I was there in mostly one piece, maybe patched up and, a couple skin grafts here and there, but he was able to live and tell the tale.
My dad was so dedicated, though. As soon as he was able, he was right back at the zoo, ready to work. The taper incident was a good example, though, of how hard the keepers at the time had to work and just how dangerous the job was. A lot of the safety stuff you see at the zoo today just wasn't there at the time.
Worked our tails off, very dangerous. I made 6 trips to the hospital, one time 10 days from a deer attacking me. We all had injuries, but for what we were being paid for, it was too dangerous. But we all loved the zoo. Without the keepers, you have no zoo. And that's the point. But they weren't getting it at that time. People in administrative positions up there look at you as laborers. That's all you are. Dick Sweeney, sometimes he was angry moments because of what supervision was doing or whatever, And that's where I saw anger, where he knew that the keepers were not being treated the way they should be treated.
In general, in the 1960s, many zoos across the country were starting to undergo some major changes, as many zoos went from small iron-barred cages to more natural enclosures. We also saw changes coming to the hiring practices for keepers. Prior to this shift, it wasn't uncommon for keepers to just be hired day laborers, with many zoos just looking for whoever they could get to clean up after the animals.
Some of the first zookeepers were prisoner release programs.
They would go to labor downtown and pick up guys who were half alcoholics, and boom, and they bring them up to work at the zoo. And there's a story of the Big Cat Canyon, the cat keeper was an alcoholic, and people came in, opened the zoo, and they went down there and they saw this keeper laying stretched out on the floor of the lion's cage. And they said, "Oh my God, the lion took a keeper." It turns out he was drunk, passed out.
As the San Diego Zoo realized they needed to improve the quality of the keepers they brought on, they started to hire those with more experience, often, as Conrad mentioned earlier, men with prior military experience. But even as keeper quality improved, the challenges they faced were only increasing.
We were never invited to an animal health meeting prior to being a cat. We were given access to the zoo library. Prior to that, we were told we didn't need it.
The quality was getting better and better, and the people who were getting there when I got there, they wanted, no, we need more. We need training and stuff like that. So we ended up starting, talking about it, and I think that's the basis of founding the AZAC.
Dad's drive was to say keepers are a lot more than just the person that cleans the stalls and feeds the animals. A lot of the keepers had a lot of great knowledge.
Dick said something about maybe starting an organization where the other zoos could join San Diego and we could communicate what's going on in other zoos, what the keepers do, and she exchange of ideas and stuff. And I said, well, that sounds like it would be pretty good. And they got to talking about what it would be called, and there was the AAZPA, American Association of Zoological Parks and Aquariums, and said, well, we could call it the AAZK, American Association of Zookeepers.
He had the vision that they needed to do this. They respected him for wanting to make zookeepers a profession and wanting to make zookeepers important in the list of people that you need to have to run a professional zoo.
When you're talking about some turbulent times and trepidations about unions and unionism and things like that, which were happening in the 60s, that was a bold move. That was a bold move.
They realized that things were going to change to the point that if keepers didn't step up and become more professional, they were going to be left in the dust, and they were not going to have the opportunity to have their own professional forum to present papers, be recognized as being a part of the zoo community as a professional. And that was a battle in the beginning.
Since the concept was all new to us, but knowing our purpose was the dissemination of information, the best way to start was to start. So we gave birth to the AAZK.
So I went to Chuck Faust, and he designed a logo for us, and the logo was basically, says, well, what kind of animal do you want? I says, I'd worked the rhinos, and I said, the rhinos, how about a rhino?
Patch designer Chuck Faust worked at the time as the architectural design director for the Zoological Society of San Diego. He would later be known for his innovative and unique designs for the buildings, enclosures, and exhibits at what is now the San Diego Safari Park. His patch design would not be well received by zoo leadership at the time, however. Not because of what it looked like, but because they wanted to stop the keepers from forming the AAZK altogether.
Dr. Schroeder, who's a director, heard word about that we were trying to part of the association, and he didn't like that because he thought that means union, and we have to pay these guys. And that's not what we were looking for. We were looking for basically training, appreciation. And I turned to my wife and says, you heard what Dr. Schroeder said? He says, if they heard about a patch, that we might be getting a patch done. He says, I'll fire the first guy that comes in wearing that patch because I'm not authorized in this. Well, I'm a former Marine. You don't threaten a Marine. So I said, what the hell? Okay, I'll piss them off. So I basically had my wife put this on my jacket, So I went in, and it freaked out a lot of the guys there. They said, oh my God, he's going to get fired, I said, if I get fired, I'll go back in the Marine Corps. If send me back to Vietnam, whatever, I didn't care, and the money was that good anyway. So basically I wore the patch. Dr. Schroeder heard about it. There was a big rumbling at the front office. Nothing was done. I never got fired. And then we had a flyer that I put at the gift shop, and Dr. Schroeder saw it and took it out and confronted me. He says, what's this? That's our AZAC flyer. And we just said, if anybody wants it, well, you're not authorized yet. He was really a hard head, and because he was still thinking union. We started having classes, and that's when really the administration started looking at it. What's going on today? Well, this evening, all the keepers are coming in from Purita's giving a presentation on this and that. I think then the wheels started changing and started realizing these guys are serious. They want to know more about and being a keeper, being a better keeper, helping the zoo.
Dick also realized that if they wanted to be taken serious by zoo administration, they needed some serious support. So he reached out to some of the top people in the field of animal care.
This is me, this is Jane, in chimpanzee language.
Jane Goodall, she was our first guest of honor. She was big time, She worked with the chimpanzees in Africa, and she's a very famous lady. And when the word went out in 1967 that Jane Goodall was our first keeper, they started thinking, wow, this AZAC, you better pay attention to him.
As the group began to finally cement some support in San Diego, it became clear it was time to bring in zoos across the country, many of which were facing the same issues at the time as San Diego was.
I can tell you stories about my first day, and you would be horrified. People would be horrified to know that's how we trained zookeepers in that day.
So we sent out some feelers. Dennis Melvin, who served as chapter secretary at the time, was directed to contact several zoos with a letter introducing AAZK. The response was overwhelming. Zookeepers nationwide were starving for a voice.
The issue now was, how do you bring together keepers across the nation at a time with no computers and no World Wide Web? Fortunately, my grandfather had a plan.
And they said, well, why don't we start an AAZK newsletter? Oh, yeah, that'd be okay. Well, Ken, why don't you be the editor of it? And I said, well, hell, I don't even know how to spell good. He said, well, you got a dictionary. Oh, okay. So I would sit down at the kitchen table and try to come up with different articles and stuff, and we bought a mimeograph machine. Then we'd go over to Dick's house and run it.
Mom would type up the master, and you'd sit there and rotate the thing to print out your copies, and then we'd staple them all, fold them, and put the labels on, and get them off to the postman.
And next thing, the LA City Zoo joined. Next thing, something from Canada joined, and also New York. All these places started joining AZAC, and it just took off like a flame. We didn't plan that. We just thought for our own San Diego Zoo. We were thinking about other zoos, Phoenix or whatever. It just took off, and everybody said that's a good idea, because they were having problems that we were having with not being recognized, not receiving proper training, and it all kind of came together.
Dick and his wife and myself, my wife went to LA, and Dick presented AZAC to AZPA. He even speaks better than he did at that time. He was quite nervous about it, so was I. But it was accepted quite well by AZPA, and I think it helped us along quite a bit.
May 1968, their work finally pays off as the founders of AAZK put out their very first newsletter introducing the organization to the nation. By December of '68, San Diego Zoo Director Charles Schroeder had even done a 180, writing an article himself for the winter newsletter. From there, it was off to the races as the newsletter began to get picked up by more and more zoos across the country.
Dad actually took some courses on English because he wanted to improve his writing skills, because while Dad was a prolific writer, he wasn't always that way.
My dad at the time didn't have a college education, so he relied on my mom, who did a lot of proofreading for the newsletters.
Probably the one that we should have up here doing the talking and could probably tell us more about AZAC than anyone else is Jenny, and she's not here tonight.
My mom was definitely the key to their success. Without her, I don't think they would have ever made it.
Mom was kind of the rock that kind of held things together.
He ended up raising 3 kids by herself because Dick had his other child he was taking care of.
I remember her sitting behind the typewriter, editing every single newsletter that went out. Countless hours she spent behind the typewriter.
Zookeepers didn't make a ton of money, so Mom would go without to ensure us kids were taken care of. She would be walking around with holes in her shoes, and it used to tick Dad off. Every Christmas, he would do his best to shower her with gifts.
She never got the so-called AAZK fame because she wasn't one to seek out the spotlight with a big role and title. But any one of those founders can tell you she was just as important as those 7 men were to its success.
Anyway, Jenny's the one that should really be thanked. She's not here tonight, so I guess we'll have to accept Dick.
On weekends, in the evenings, Dad was in the garage doing all of this stuff for AAZK. He might have run into obstacles along the way and money to start it going, but Dad never gave up. Dad had a vision. Dad always had a vision.
We visited zoos as we went back to visit family during the summer when us kids were all out of school. So we'd hit up the different zoos and talk about memberships at different zoos, and they'd get new chapters at their zoo and join the AAZK. So Dad was very involved in that, and us kids loved just going to the zoo, and getting out of the car for a little while on the cross-country trips. I had a pair of Levi button-down bell-bottom pants that I begged my mother to buy me. And I had been collecting the zoo patches off of some of the keepers' uniforms. If they didn't have it in their gift shop, I'd ask one of the keepers to tear it off their uniform. So they would gladly have me snip it off their uniform. And so I collected patches from all the zoos that I had visited, and I had sewn them all onto the bottom of the bell bottom. So when I walked by, you'd see all these patches flicking in the wind.
Do you have any idea how many total zoos you guys visited?
I honestly could not even give you a number, but I know that we traveled across country all the time, and we went to several zoo trips, and it was a lot of fun because we got to get the behind-the-scene tours at all of these zoos, and my dad would get in contact with someone and they took us all around. But my favorite trip was going to Honolulu, Hawaii, and when we had Jimmy Stewart coming along with us.
Wait, like Jimmy Stewart, like It's a Wonderful Life,
Yes.
Jimmy Stewart?
Yes, he was a huge supporter of the AAZK.
What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down. Hey, that's a pretty good idea. I'll give you the moon, Barry.
A special detail worth sharing here. Nearly every Christmas, my mom would sit us down to watch It's a Wonderful Life at home, leaving out a key detail that she knew the lead actor growing up.
Jimmy Stewart, his wife Gloria, and his two twin daughters came down, and turns out Gloria was very involved with the LA Zoo, Los Angeles. And now the word went out. Guess what? Jimmy Stewart came down to the AZAC anniversary. So all of a sudden the people upstairs are going, what the heck's going on? They started realizing, I think we better accept these guys. And they started looking at us more closer and realized, yeah, all we want to do is receive training and respect. We don't care about the money that much, so that kind of got us kicked over. Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart would serve as AAZK's keynote speaker for this second conference to take place across the Pacific in beautiful sunny Hawaii. But Jimmy Stewart wouldn't end up being the only celebrity on the 747, though.
We actually flew a black bear cub all the way from San Diego to the Hawaii conference. His name was Blaze. He was such a cute little guy. Blaze was this gesture from the San Diego Zoo to Honolulu Zoo on behalf of the AAZK. So that year he was our official little mascot for the conference.
It was no bigger than a cat, a full-grown cat. So, but I just remember him just being so small and knowing how big he would get, and just, lifting up his paw was awesome. He had to sit and coach, so he was down with one of the keepers in a coach seat because they wouldn't put him in a cargo hold because of the flight height. Cabin pressures weren't great, back in the 70s. So they were afraid that, he would get something wrong with him if he got into the cargo hold where they normally transported animals.
Was he loud during the trip?
Yes, he cried the whole time, and everybody in second class had to hear him. So.
They're doing their best to keep him quiet on the 5-hour flight to Hawaii. It just so happened, too, that actor Michael Landon happened to be on the plane, so he came back and paid a visit. He was up in first class and had to come back and see what the commotion was, because Blaze was acting up on the plane and was being loud and attracting attention.
Hey, that bear totally had my back. I was the biggest Little House on the Prairie fan. My neighbor, her mom, had made us Little House on the Prairie dresses, and that was something we played all the time. We would pretend to be on that show. And so when, of all people, Michael Landon suddenly comes back to see what was so loud in the coach part of the airplane, I about lost my mind. So Blaze, I was a big fan of that bear.
He eventually calmed down as soon as they got on the ground. I think it was, he wasn't used to the pressure, or he was missing mama. I don't know.
They invited keepers from all over the country to fly out. Bring your family with you. How often do you get to go to Hawaii?
The Princess Kapolani hotel that we were at was right directly across from the zoo. And you could literally open the patio door, sliding windows, and hear the peacocks screaming and the animals getting riled up in the morning when they were getting fed. And, so it was like living in the jungle. It's like you're in this giant concrete box of a hotel and you hear this zoo and wild nature next door. It's crazy.
They did a big luau to close out the conference, and we had Jimmy Stewart there as keynote speaker, and he'd been super nice to us kids the whole time. Hawaii overall, though, was honestly a great time. The Honolulu conference was kind of the moment AAZK seemed like it had finally found its footing and that all the hard work had finally paid off.
And all it took was perseverance, a lot of headaches, but that's what it takes to keep the organization going. It's important to note here that none, and I'm going to repeat this, none of today's keeper privileges existed prior to or without AAZK. That's not just at this zoo, it's at every zoo across the country.
But as the organization grew, so came growing pains. The group began to face challenges as Conrad Grayson, one of the original founders, made the choice to walk away from zoo life altogether, to instead join the San Diego Police Department.
They paid a rookie what a top senior mammal keeper made at the zoo.
There's a fellow here named Conrad Grayson that worked here as a keeper, and I guarantee you he did about 2 people's jobs. So when he finally left, we lost 2 people and we then gained 1 back.
In San Diego, things kind of started falling apart a little bit. Some dissension started happening within the zoo at San Diego a little bit, because you're doing your keeper's job and you're doing his AAZK stuff too, and it's all volunteer.
The first AAZK historian, Rochelle Watkins, would describe this time around 1973 and 1974 in her book on the history of AAZK as particularly turbulent. Some members started questioning the organization's operational procedures as AAZK faced a major clash of personalities.
A lot of differing opinions about how this organization might work and how it might function. There was simple tension between AZA, which is the management aspect, and objections to AAZK, which was the blue-collar aspect or the labor aspect of it.
Then, the official newsletter gets a competitor. The Topeka chapter publishes a newsletter of their own in the mid-70s called the Ruptured Rhino.
What the Ruptured Rhino was sort of like one of those groups that was unhappy about things, and they were trying to make a point about it and to make things better. So they came up with this Ruptured Rhino, and people get upset about things, but in a way it's like you have to shake things up sometimes before they get better.
Instead of pushing back, the AAZK leaders would go on to put the Topeka chapter to work themselves, spinning out the newsletter into a new publication, the Animal Keepers Forum. By 1975, that publication would become the official publication of the organization. Still, rifts remained. Many factions kept challenging leadership and the direction the organization was headed.
They had just gotten so big, they couldn't get away with operating that way anymore.
Dad had finally hit a breaking point.
December 1974. A surprising letter kicks off the newsletter.
I don't know how to put 7 years of gratitude into one letter. During the course of hundreds of hours of AAZK business, I would estimate more than 15,000 pieces of mail have been processed, and countless subjects pertaining to AAZK operation have been discussed at my desk. I can step down from AAZK knowing I did my best. I don't look back at times of trouble. I look at the notes and the praise from so many of you for all the headaches of operating the AAZK office. My aspirin was the scribbled note at the bottom of a membership renewal slip that said, "Thanks for AAZK. Keep up the good work."
So my question is, Why would your dad step away from something that he had built from the ground up?
I really don't know. I never was privy to that.
I'd have to say the same.
I had hit a dead end. As AAZK still exists today, I knew things didn't just end in 1974, but I needed answers, not just about my grandfather's resignation. I wanted to know how AAZK managed to carry on after he left, and meet the people who had kept the organization alive. One of those leaders was actually someone I'd already spoken with, AAZK's first historian, Rochelle Watkins. Our earlier conversation had only scratched the surface, and I knew there was so much more to uncover. So I met Rochelle again at Zoo Miami for a longer discussion, not just to talk about AAZK, but to hear the personal story that tied her family to the keeper world, long before she ever became its historian.
What's more fun than a 3-ring circus? Well, maybe a 1-ring circus, like this one from Moscow, that opens its American tour in New York's Madison Square Garden.
As a kid, I grew up in the circus, third generation from an animal training family. My grandfather was Ira Watkins, and my father was Buddy Watkins. He had chimpanzees, and we also worked in zoos. In 1965 is when he started working in zoos. And that was right before the Endangered Species Act came, because my dad realized when that was happening that things were going to change. So my dad realized his job may not exist in the future, and he thought that it would be a good idea for us to work in zoos because we could still work with animals and use our talents with knowing animal behavior and things like that. And so that's what we did. My dad, he found out the Louisville Zoo was looking for an animal trainer to do a chimpanzee show. I started as a kid volunteer in the Louisville Zoo because my dad didn't want us goofing around. So he was my first supervisor, no calling in sick.
For Rochelle, this would eventually evolve into a lifelong career at zoos across the country, primarily taking care of elephants and various primates.
Yes. He's like, she's talking my language, but I don't know who the hell she is.
Moments like this show how natural Rochelle is around animals, but when she began her career, her biggest obstacles weren't in the enclosures. They were often among her coworkers because of attitudes toward female keepers.
When I started working at the zoo, they were like, they had had problems with women working with great apes before. They said, you know, we don't know if you can work with the orangutans, Rochelle, because, you know, you're a girl. And I'm like, I've worked with chimps for 10 years before I came here. What's the problem?
When I started in this profession, it was probably 75% male and 25% female.
These women attendants, and they were taking care of the animals in the children's zoo, and they were great, you know. And I thought, something's wrong here. Why aren't they keepers? What they call them keepers? Oh no, women are called attendants. And I thought, this is BS. I worked with some real hardworking gals who worked great with animals, but I just couldn't understand why we didn't have female keepers at the San Diego Zoo. They were attendants. That kind of pissed me off a little bit because I think, you know, it's not equal, you know. And I worked with them. They were good.
Just as AAZK would prove to be a crucial voice for improving animal exhibits and keeper safety at a pivotal time in the keeper profession, it would also be a major influence in advancing careers for those female attendants. The 1973 AAZK newsletter would bring this to the forefront, as many zoos would only allow women at the time to be attendants. In this newsletter, the Lincoln Park Zoo would publish an article on how they were allowing women to become full keepers, adding they were often referred to as, quote, the best man in the building. Despite zoo leadership presenting many challenges for female keepers, Rochelle's unique animal care skill set would continue to help her advance in her career. Eventually, she would be hired to work with primates by my grandfather himself in San Diego.
Dick Sweeney, he seemed like a quiet, he reminded me of like an orangutan. You know, an orangutan will sit there and watch something and they're just observing what's going on and they know what's happening. But he seemed like the kind of person that was hardly ever surprised about something, like he would see things coming or know something was going to happen before it happened because he observed stuff a lot. And he would have to be that kind of a person if he had the forethought about what the zookeepers needed and that they needed something like AAZK. The fact that he thought of that was so ahead of his time.
After working with Dick in San Diego, in the early 90s, as AAZK neared its 25th anniversary, Rochelle found herself inspired by my grandfather and the other leaders she met in San Diego to dive deeper into the organization's roots. It's because of her book chronicling the collective history of the AAZK, I was able to find many answers about the organization, but her book lacked the one answer I really needed: why my grandfather had stepped away.
It is a typical problem that happens with any organization. You have this cycle or an ebb and flow situation. You have people that get burned out because they've started something, they want to see it grow, and after a while you give and give and give and you get sucked dry and just like, I can't do this anymore. And you wish that people would step up. But people don't step up until the people that have been keeping it going back off. So he knew that. He knew it's going to have to be dire straits or nobody's going to step up. People have to fill a void. So he created a void for somebody to fill it.
I think in the very first part of my career with AAZK as a leader, it was trying to smooth over those tensions. By that time, a lot of the internal tension had gone. That's really due to the leadership of Gene Ramadka, who smoothed things over, Frank Cohn, who followed her in the presidency. And those two were probably the beginning of a stabilizing influence on AAZK as a professional organization.
Gene Ramadka. She was what we called the Jane Appleseed of AZAC chapters. And she used to say the easiest way to pronounce my name is 3 different types of liquor. Gin, rum, vodka.
The nice thing about this organization, or probably the greatest thing about this organization, is that I don't feel uncomfortable in this position because I'm a zookeeper. That's all I am. And that's what this organization is run by, zookeepers. That's what makes this organization work, is because it's basically people like you and me care and are willing to give a little bit more, because we know that the only way we can improve this field, especially the zookeeper field, is if we're proud of what we're doing, we know we're important, and we just have to stand up and make sure that everybody around us knows that.
She ended up going to work at the San Diego Wild Animal Park. She became national president. She connected AZAC with other international groups. She was a very energetic person that networked people all over the world. And she was very good for the zookeeping community. I remember Gene Ramadka was one of the ones in Florida. In Miami, they didn't want the girls to work with rhinos. They didn't want the girls to work with elephants. They didn't want the girls to work with great apes. She went up to Busch Gardens and she saw the girls working with elephants. She saw the girls working with rhinos. She saw the girls working with great apes. She comes back down and she goes, hey, they're working with rhinos, they're working with elephants, and they're working with great apes up there. How come we can't do it down here? And that was really where the existence of organizations like AZAC played a huge part. The more you got to know other zookeepers, the more you got together, the more you talked to each other and you found out what was going on outside of your zoo. That's what the women started doing, is talking about what was happening at other places, and they brought it up. I want to do that. I think I can do that too. It was like the burning your bra or anything else, they were like burning their way through to try and work with other dangerous animals. So yeah, Gene Ramadka was a great person.
We began to see people like Gene in leadership roles, which was absolutely unheard of. There were not too many AZA presidents that were female, but When people like Jean came in, very logically organized, very driven, she had a plan from the get-go. And she could convey that and speak to a room, and you literally, the sexual genetics and whatever, they disappeared. She was just a leader, and it mattered not what gender she was. Calm spoken, and when she explained something, it was like, okay, let's go.
I always hear this question, well, what does AZAC do for me? That's not the question we should be asking. We should be saying, what can we do for AZAC?
Tragically, Jean's time would be cut short, as she would pass of a rare liver cancer shortly after this speech at the young age of 34. AAZK would go on to name the Excellence in Animal Care Award in her honor.
She was so dedicated to her animals. She would buy stuff out of her own pocket for her animals. You know, if the zoo couldn't afford it or wouldn't buy it, she'd go out and buy, you know, whatever toy or food or whatever that they needed. She was a very good zookeeper.
It's the most coveted award that we have. It's the award that everybody wants to be nominated for, and then obviously that's the one that they would like to win. That was a passionate person who also had a business brain. She had a passion for animal keepers and a passion for animal keeping. There are some wonderful leaders in this profession because they understand that leadership furthers their profession. AZK is a stepping stone to management leadership, and they have used it to great advantage. And Jean was probably the root of that expansion.
It was not just Jean stepping up, though. This was a time keepers needed to come together for AAZK to survive.
AAZK would not have existed if it wasn't for Susan. Barbara Manspeaker and Susan Kahn loved AAZK, and Pat and Larry Samarco were some of those important people because they were actually some of the first people that worked with Santa Fe College to develop the curriculum that started the teaching zoo in Santa Fe.
AAZK's influence reached beyond the zoo gates, shaping not just keepers, but future conservationists. Among them, Jimmy Stewart's daughter Kelly, who had volunteered at San Diego Zoo because of her dad's AZAC involvement.
How are your daughters?
They're wonderful. One, Kelly, she's the mountain gorilla girl, right. You know, that was in Rwanda. She and her husband were actually spent 5 years there with the gorillas. And everything's gone better with the gorillas. They were very near to extinction.
Right.
But the country of Rwanda itself, the government, they're now in favor of protecting the gorillas. And the whole gorilla population has increased in the last 2-3 years.
It's amazing what a few people can do if they get the word out.
Yeah.
Parson had it right. It's amazing what a few people can do. And in AAZK's long fight to endure, one of the people who made all the difference, though he would likely humbly deny it, was Ed Hansen.
He was instrumental in us cleaning up our Constitution and bylaws, and for a lot of the legal stuff that we had to clean up. Because before then, it was very loose. Nobody would know how much money anybody's spending or how much they needed.
Ed provided for AAZK something the group desperately needed if it was going to remain sustainable: structure and business know-how, as well as a determination to unite the chapters together.
He really was the one that started them on the road to being a grown-up organization.
After decades at the helm of AAZK, Ed recently stepped down as CEO, leaving behind a lasting impact and some pretty big shoes to fill. But as Rochelle had said, and I was beginning to understand, it's not until those strong leaders like Ed step back that others realize they need to take the initiative and make that step up. Thanks to Rochelle and Ed, I was filled in on some of the big gaps in AAZK history. But for Rochelle...
You on camera? Can I help you?
Sure.
It's not enough to just tell me about the life of a zookeeper. She wants to have me see it firsthand, taking me on a tour of Zoo Miami. Rochelle gets me into the zoo through a special program, trading in an old cell phone for a free ticket. From there, she leads me through various enclosures, even pointing out that one of the birds wasn't a Zoo Miami resident at all, just a clever local who'd flown in for the free food.
This is a wild wood stork visiting the zoo as a freeloader, Florida freeloader. They might be getting ready to feed them. That might be why they're excited.
But the real highlight comes as we round the corner to a troop of very vocal chimpanzees. It's here we meet Bubbles.
Bubbles! Hi, Bubbles! Hi, baby! Smile, Bubbles! I love you, baby!
Rochelle had worked with Bubbles at Louisville Zoo nearly 50 years earlier as a teen.
Bubbles! She's a good baby!
Even after all these years, she can still call her name, and Bubbles lights up with excitement.
Oh! Hi, Bubbles! I know! I wish I could touch you too, baby! I can't believe how old you are now, Mama! I can't believe how old you are! Smile! I love you, Bubbles! Is it dinner time? Don't miss your dinner. I know you're not going to miss dinner. Ooh.
The one less ecstatic, her chimpanzee friend. It's dinner time, and Rochelle is preventing Bubbles from heading in. He quickly puts us in our place,
No.
chucking a rock our way.
There's a lot of divas in the chimp world.
This particular sign ends up proving pretty accurate for us on tour. The thrill didn't end with the chimps, though. This being Miami, our next surprise came in the form of a few uninvited guests, some opportunistic invasive iguanas cutting across the path. They would be one of many iguanas we'd see at the zoo that day. Like the wild wood stork we'd met earlier, the iguanas are also a couple of wildlife freeloaders, helping themselves to the zoo's leftover snacks. All in all, it's a pretty eventful day at the zoo. Seeing firsthand the bond between a keeper and the animals they care for made it clear why people like Rochelle, Jean, Ed, and so many others worked so hard to keep AAZK alive. Each keeper who kept it going carried with them the compassion and spirit my grandfather had hoped would endure. But his own story was far from over. While my grandfather left AAZK behind in the mid-70s, he wasn't done leading. In January 1975, under some family pressure to return to the New York area where he'd grown up, he took on a new challenge, running the Beardsley Zoo in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Before the zoo was even thought about, Frederick Law Olmsted was enlisted by the city of Bridgeport to design Beardsley Park. So Beardsley Park was designed by the same person who designed Central Park.
Initially, the park wasn't planned to include a zoo at all, but that would change as P.T. Barnum's circus in the 1920s brought on a new curiosity for wildlife to park guests. With the circus headquartered nearby, employees used to regularly take the animals through Beardsley Park for exercise. Soon families would gather into the park with picnic blankets to see the parade of animals going through.
This park commissioner decided, let's start working on getting a zoo here.
Beardsley had really cool history, but for most of the people who lived there, that zoo was really just like something to do in the park. Most locals barely cared about it.
What was the Beardsley Zoo like when you first arrived?
Chain link. It was really run down and there was very few animals, and I knew Dad had his work cut out for it. And he was anxious to get it done. He really wanted the challenge to bring it up to, that day's standards, because it was really poorly operated and, wasn't really appealing to the public. So his first thing was get the public involved in what he was doing. So he did every interview, every newspaper thing that he could possibly do to promote the zoo. Went into schools to talk about animals, did whatever he could to bring people to the zoo. And they were in the midst of building the children's zoo when he first got there. So he had to complete that project, which involved, basically building a whole mini zoo inside a zoo.
It was a tough time. So it wasn't easy working within those confines you had with the city. Back then, and was always zoo begins with Z, and that's where your budget was, bottom of the alphabet. So you got very little support, you got very little dollars. He had to build opportunities within the confines of the city because, remember, his contract was with the city of Bridgeport. Dick was essentially a city employee.
Zoo director Greg Dancho first began his career at the Beardsley Zoo back in 1975, hired by my grandfather as a volunteer.
He said, okay, here's a mop, here's a bucket, go mop the monkey house floor. And you know something? Glad to do it. I was like, I'm working in the zoo. That's crazy. I'm working in the zoo. You have to understand, back then, the zoo had nothing. Uniforms, we had nothing. Back then, we had tools, we had nothing.
My dad started to look for anything he could do to bring money in for the zoo.
We opened up a snack bar, which they'd never had. We had the gift shop, which was an old office room that we built. We painted. Lots of paint.
One of the funniest things my mom used to tell me was, a fresh coat of paint covers a multitude of sins, and I firmly believe that. She stayed incredibly busy helping paint and even sewing costumes. She created this giant papier-mâché costume, and it was Millie the Mouse to be the mascot for the newly opened children's zoo, and my sister, she had to dress up in it quite a bit.
When I wasn't in school, I was at the zoo.
My brother Gary was Santa at Christmas, and anything we could do to bring money in and raise money, we did.
Prior to their arrival, the Beardsley Zoo's track record was dismal, with multiple failed inspections and numerous issues, a problem my family would see firsthand in a frightening incident shortly after their arrival to the zoo.
The tiger areas, the way it was set up was that there was the main area where they were outside, and there was two den areas in the back, and then the doors to the back of that so you can get in clean. He opened up the door to put the food in and went to get the food, but forgot that he had left the shift doors open to the tiger in the main area. So he went to the kitchen, just bringing the meat back out, was walking back out, opened the swinging door. The tiger is sitting in the middle of the floor looking at him. So he took the meat and he threw the meat at the tiger, and he ran out, and then we locked the building down.
On the plus side, the tiger enclosure didn't open out to the public, so the good news was the tiger was at least confined to the offices and not roaming the zoo freely. But the bad news was that Dad and several people were locked in their offices, not knowing outside their doors was a Siberian tiger who hadn't had their lunch yet.
We had no idea where the tiger was.
So, Dad's on the walkie-talkies trying to keep in touch with all the people downstairs.
Went down to where we kept the tranquilization darts and put a ladder up against the building there to the upstairs offices. And the idea was they were going to walk up and take a look in and maybe get in there, and get into the building and try to find where it is and dart him from that way. And I just remember Paul Madd, who was the senior keeper at the time, went up the ladder, got to the top, looked in the window, and the tiger looked right back at him. He was looking at it, and Paul was an ex-Navy guy. Did the Navy thing, put his hands on the side, put his feet on the side, slid all the way down to the bottom. I remember doing it. He was like, and so they went back upstairs, back up the ladder again with the dart gun. The window was able to be cracked open, and the tiger was ripping apart a stuffed Rhea that they had in the hallway, and they were able to dart him and then bring him back downstairs.
They were very lucky that day. It was just one example of some of the safety measures that in a professional zoo would have been taken that hadn't been really instilled in a lot of the staff at the time. That's something my dad tried to change.
When Dick came in, his job when he came here was to work at the zoo, get it to be a better place. He left it a better place. What he also did was bringing in zoo practices to our facility that never was used before. Before that, I don't think we had any professional zoo people. We had people that were superintendents, of park superintendents and people but not people who actually had zoo experience and knew what a zoo was all about, why a zoo existed. And so I think that really moved us forward a little bit. Dick came in and went back and said, okay, I'm going to put in, a lot of different type of animals.
Mandrills, black bears, injured bald eagles.
A lot of cool kind of animals.
Emus, Siberian tigers. She brought in a ton of animals.
His biggest challenge, though, would be trying to improve the life of some animals already at the zoo. 2 elephants, Shakuntala and Champagne. Today, their old enclosure has been retrofitted into an enclosure for a group of small spider monkeys, but upon seeing it, I'm astounded to see in person just how tiny of an enclosure Beardsley Zoo's 2 elephants used to live in.
You always felt bad for her because Champagne she was confined to that enclosure. She always had one chain around one of her legs and was kind of, she'd kind of walk back and forth.
Champagne was the smaller of the 2 elephants, and she got sick. She got beat up a lot by the bigger elephant. He would just batter around, and the elephant enclosure was just too small for 2 big packagers. So there was a huge campaign to try and get her moved to another zoo so she wouldn't get hurt.
About a year in, she started developing foot rot, and there was a lot of worry that she wasn't doing well.
Ended up getting gangrene on her hooves from standing around basically in water too much, and her urine and feces from both of them.
The vets that came in worked on her a lot. They had to do some major surgery on her foot, and there was a lot of antibiotics that they were giving her, and she started getting worse and worse.
Dad did whatever he could to try and keep them both alive, and he even tried getting her to go to a different zoo, and nobody would take her. So he, was fighting a losing battle, and the vets came in and they shaved her hooves one time and put boots, big, huge leather boots that they had made specifically to fit her, and it just wasn't enough.
She eventually got sepsis and died, and it was devastating to the keeper, and especially the keeper that had been taking care of her for so many years. I think a lot, the staff and even Dad at the time, it was hard. It was a hard thing to deal with.
Everybody at the zoo, all the keepers, cried for days after she passed.
The keepers were really upset over it, saying, this should never have happened, and she probably would have lived another, 10, 15 years.
My dad got to see firsthand what happens when you have the public not caring enough about wildlife, and it hit him hard.
He was very, very angry that the Zoological Society didn't do enough to keep her alive. And that was one of the reasons why he wanted nothing to do with them after that.
Politics were always Dad's kryptonite, and his frustration with the city after Champagne's death just made progress kind of hit a standstill.
That's where things started to get dicey toward 1977.
We ran into the fact that the zoo, which had been this rundown thing for so long with all these new animals and attendance up, suddenly was bringing in a good bit of revenue. So the city started to want to get more control of it.
Dad and the new mayor at the time didn't quite see eye to eye, even though Dad had brought in a lot of money and really changed that. And they were actually making money and profit by the time Dad left.
After a few years, he started having a fight with the city over them trying to take the zoo funds that should have been used for animal enclosure and improvements, but they wanted to use it for other things. It got to the point that my dad was just frustrated and was ready to get out of there. He's just gone through the political struggle of creating a massive organization of AZAC, and now he's right back dealing with city politics. So when he got a call offering to take him back out to San Diego To the San Diego Zoo, he jumped at the chance, and he pushed for Greg Dancher to get the director role, and we headed back to San Diego.
Though my grandfather's improvements to the zoo were important, they would actually pale in comparison to Greg's, who has come quite a ways from mopping the floors after school, stepping up to now run the zoo. Along with reminiscing about my grandfather's time as director, Greg also takes my mother and I on a tour of today's Beardsley Zoo. It's the first time in nearly 50 years my mom has seen Beardsley Zoo, and today, thanks to efforts of my grandfather, and largely Greg's later leadership, it's a much different place than she remembers.
Oh yeah, you totally changed it.
You changed the seal. We have a seal pool and an alligator pool. He's over there. And we keep him here all winter. All winter long. He's in the pool. The pool's heated.
But even all these years later, Greg tells us he is still proud of some of the attributes he took from my grandfather.
I remember him being very gregarious, very nice, coming out and saying hello to people, which back then, having somebody in that position, coming out to say hello and how things are going was pretty big. And I think I take that experience from him to this day.
Just like with AAZK, my grandfather had made his mark on Beardsley Zoo and saw it was his time to leave it in the hands of the next generation of leadership, to let them step up and take the reins. And the zoo was in no better hands than with Greg, who transformed the zoo in so many incredible ways following 40 years of his leadership.
I guess my proudest accomplishment, we've passed our 100th anniversary here at the zoo. So after 43 years full time here, which is almost half of the existence of the zoo, we have now passed the 100th anniversary, and our attendance has grown, our philanthropy has grown, our the offerings we give to the public, our education programs have grown. We went from an $800,000 budget to a $6 million budget. I think we still have value here to see some of the most endangered species of animals we have on the planet in Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo. Where else are you going to see some of these animals? If you want to see them on an iPad, that's great. But walking around a zoo and seeing them face to face, seeing them, doing their natural behaviors. When you have that live face-to-face connection, that's the thing that makes a zoo. That is really my proudest. I think the proudest thing I think I've ever done is take us from where we were, and now it's time to start letting the next generation take us to the next 100 years.
Just as the next generation of leaders were stepping up in Connecticut, and my family's journey took a new direction, I'd learned AAZK over the same time was expanding more than ever before. While the death of AAZK president Jean Ramadka in 1989 had hit the organization hard, her efforts and love for animals still lived on in many of the keepers who had come to know her. Her spirit was never more truly embodied than when Kansas City's AAZK chapter came up with a bold idea to save rhinos.
With Bowling for Rhinos, it stemmed initially, it was one chapter that started an event called Bowling for Rhinos, and they kind of spearheaded, let's make this a national program. Let's get other chapters involved. Let's make this a bigger thing.
When they started raising money for the Rhino Fund with the Bowling for Rhinos, it was like, unheard of for zookeepers to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, that's been going on since 1990 and has raised over almost $9.2 million.
AAZK had been a voice for zookeepers for years, but for the first time they were going a step further and making a major difference for wildlife. Some of the first funds from the Bowling for Rhino fundraiser would go on to what is now the Lewa Wildlife Conservancy, with proceeds being used to buy a light airplane to track poacher activity and trucks for animal transport. Today, thanks heavily to the help of the Bowling for Rhinos fundraiser, Lewa is thriving.
At Lewa Wildlife Conservancy, our iconic species is the black rhino. Currently, we got 268 rhinos just from the initial 13 rhinos that were introduced in 1983. We are now a major source of rhinos for Kenya, other conservancies, opening new sanctuaries and donating rhinos to restock where rhinos used to exist. and now they are not. And we are proud to ensure that we work with the government to restock other conservancies.
Chapters started doing the rainforest parking meter, and they were involved with buying property and keeping it as wild land. So the zoo directors started seeing how it was benefiting the zoos to be involved with the chapters, because the chapters were bringing also positive press for the zoos with the work that they were doing.
Recent AAZK President Paul Brandenberger, like Ed and Rochelle, has seen major growth with the organization. He filled me in on the many ways AAZK is now involved in fighting for conservation and the protection of animal habitats.
Bowling for Rhinos, as great as it is, we always say rhinos are the flagship, but it spreads beyond that. We're built around protecting black rhinos and white rhinos, but subsequently through that protected a variety of the other species that they share their habitats with in Africa and Asia. We also have another nationwide program, which is Trees for You and Me, which is aimed at preventing climate change. Through that one, and with Bowling for Rhinos, in both cases, it's the local chapters will fundraise, and all of that money is kind of pulled together to support, these global conservation efforts. The really unique thing with AAZK, because we have all of these local chapters,
Dining for rhino.
is every chapter and every individual within those chapters has the capacity to be an agent of change with those programs.
Well, if you want to give back and have fun at the same time, we got an event for you happening this Thursday, Bowling for Rhinos.
We'll be participating in an event called Bowling for Rhinos.
Zookeepers across the country came together to help save this incredible animal by creating Bowling for Rhinos.
Did you ever imagine when Bowling for Rhinos started in the 90s that it would become the mammoth fundraiser that it is today?
No, sir. As a matter of fact, I can remember I was in the room when the concept was brought forth to make this a national program. I will be perfectly honest with you, my first thought was, this will go for 5 years and then we'll figure something else out. Never did I think we would still be doing this very successfully 33 years later. These funds that we give have a different impact. It's primarily rhino protection, which is jobs. In Lewa, it affects the entire community. Some of these funds certainly go to rhino protection, but they're on a protected sanctuary. Poaching is not a huge issue there, though recently it has been because of economic climate. But we've built hospitals, we've built schools, we've funded women's programs. Somebody told me that there was like 2,000 jobs created on Lewa, everything from housekeeping and cook staff to doctors and vets, et cetera, for the community. By providing these jobs, we're ensuring the species in that area are protected because the entire community is a part of that process. We are ensuring they not only value wildlife, but they also benefit from protecting those animals and their habitats. So now you're talking about a huge impact.
Talking with Paul and Ed, I began to see just how far AAZK's impact has spread. From its original mission of empowering keepers, to ensuring the survival of the habitats the animals they care for call home. But like Rochelle had shown me, they knew words could only take me so far. If I was going to fully understand how AZAC has evolved, I needed to walk in the footsteps of those on the front lines. So they helped link me up with Michelle Elliott, an animal care specialist at Zoo Atlanta and the leader of my local AAZK chapter in Georgia. I've been invited by Michelle to shadow her for the day. While I'd love to get a look behind the scenes, for safety reasons, I'm filming from the public viewing area. It doesn't take long to see why. Today, she's taking care of Zoo Atlanta's giant pandas. At the time, Atlanta is one of the last places in the US where you can still see giant pandas. And prepping an enclosure for the twin sisters, Ya-Loon and Shi-Loon, is no small task. Michelle's day starts with cleaning up from the night before and making sure there's plenty of bamboo to munch on for breakfast. For those who may be unfamiliar with their story, giant pandas first arrived at US zoos in the 1970s as part of a loan agreement with China. This approach, nicknamed panda diplomacy, became a key tool in easing tensions between China and the West, while also raising global awareness about panda conservation. Once Michelle is finished with our fuzzy friends, she's finally able to step outside the enclosure and walk me through her day.
So as a swing in the mammal department, my role is to move between several areas as needed. So some days I'm here with the giant pandas and red pandas. Other days I'm off with what we call our meat-eating carnivores, so lions, tigers, bears, oh my. Feel free to cut out that oh my.
Michelle informs me that she is one of approximately 70 animal care specialists working at Zoo Atlanta. It may sound like a fair bit of staff, but it's nothing when you realize they take care of more than 1,000 animals across the zoo each and every day.
So our day begins with us checking on the animals, giving them breakfast. Usually they've had access to an indoor and outdoor area overnight, so we'll bring them just into the indoor section while we clean the outdoors, set it up for the day with food and enrichment, and send them out into a public viewing area for the day. And then we get to clean all of the mess they made indoors, which usually is quite a bit. So we spend most of our morning working on that. We will squeeze in a training session or two if we can. And then in the afternoon, we are usually full with behind the scenes encounters with our animals or public talks about them. And then setting up for the evening, doing midday checks and dinner and starting it all over again.
For Michelle, Zoo Atlanta isn't just the place where she works. It's also the reason she got into animal care in the first place.
When I was 9 years old, I did an overnight program here at the zoo and fell in love with tigers. And then our instructor told us that tigers were endangered. So I was like, well, I'm 9, I'll save them. And after that, everything I could do was based toward zookeeping.
And that doesn't just include working for conservation throughout the workday. Even after a busy day where she shows me that she walked 24,000 steps, Michelle is still right back at it that evening, working again. This time volunteering her free time for conservation.
So our chapter has long been involved in conservation fundraising. We currently raise around $5,000 to $10,000 for conservation each year, and we are hoping to increase that in the future.
Tonight, Michelle and a few of her fellow keepers are out at a nearby pizzeria, taking over the restaurant for their Pizza for Pachyderms fundraiser. Restaurant takeovers for conservation funds are a common occurrence for Michelle and the Zoo Atlanta animal care professionals. This is just one of many events yearly that they put on. Among their other events, a brewery takeover called Hops for Horns and a cocktail lounge takeover called Conservation Cocktails. I quickly learned from Michelle there's no short supply of alliteration-inspired puns when it comes to Georgia Azak. One thing that is on short supply, straws, and most single-use plastics. Michelle makes it a point not to use them.
Zoo Atlanta is what inspired me to reduce my impact on the environment. I was challenged for a plastic-free July challenge a few years ago here, and that really sent me off to the races. So I now carry my own utensils everywhere, including straws.
For Michelle, removing plastics is just a small effort that makes a difference in the overall fight towards conservation. Much like their fundraiser, which manages to bring in nearly $10,000 for elephant support efforts. Georgia AAZK may be just one chapter, but like I'd seen with my grandfather's efforts in the past, here in the present, one small group was making all the difference. And it was truly inspiring to see leaders like Michelle not just talking the talk to zoo guests, but living for conservation beyond the zoo gates. It really gave me an in-depth look into today's modern zookeeper. But little did I know, I would soon get a call giving me the closest look I'd had yet into the world of zookeeping. Hello?
You belong in the zoo, the San Diego Zoo. You belong in the zoo, and the zoo belongs to you.
It may have taken a 3,000-mile flight to get there from Atlanta, but I'm ecstatic to be invited back to the zoo where it all began. Escondido, California, at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. Here, I'm teamed up with Alexa Bermansky, a senior wildlife care specialist who spends her day caring for a wide range of hoofstock across the park. Having worked for the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance for 7 years, she's the perfect guide to show me something I'd only heard about until now, what a Zookeeper's Day actually looks like behind the scenes.
We start really early. We start probably before the sun comes up. We have to be here at 6 a.m. most of our shifts. We show up and we get to change into uniforms because of biosecurity. So I get to show up in my PJs, and then we have to change out into our uniforms, and that just helps make sure that we don't transmit any diseases to our animals or to our animals back home.
Our first stop, the forage department, to pick up the animal's specialized diet.
So today we're going to be going into an habitat called Asian Plains. It has a lot of our Asian deer and rhino species. So we're going to pick up some Bermuda hay and some of their specialized pellets, which can be like grain and whatnot.
We're gonna grab a couple bags. So each bag has a different tag, meaning it has a different formula for different animals. On an average day, we'll grab 12 of those. So we'll have like 6 to 8 bales of Bermuda grass, hay, and then 12 bags of pellets. So lots of food, lots of animals to feed.
With the truck loaded up, and I should mention a bit of senior keeper backup in the tail end of the truck to keep our camera crew safe.
You guys all good?
Awesome. Okay.
We're ready to head into the park enclosure.
Right now, we're going through what we call an airlock. It's a double gate system. With these airlocks, we keep our animals safe and also our native animals safe. So at all times, there should be a gate closed before you enter and go into the other one.
I don't end up minding the wait as we go through a series of safety gates. It gives me the chance to learn how Alexa ended up as a wildlife care specialist.
Now, are you from San Diego originally?
I am. Born and raised. I grew up in Poway. It was always my dream to end up working here. My mom and dad always took me, and my family had a huge family, so they're always like, we're going to take you to the safari park and just let you run. So that's what we did. Grew up coming here and then seeing the keepers doing their thing, and it just was like, I want to do what they're doing. I want to see what goes on. I want to take care of animals. And I went to school and I got a biology degree, and I worked with sea lion rehabilitation. I was a herpetology DA for a little bit, and then I got the internship here. So it was just kind of a perfect lineup, and then I got here and never left. And my family's still in Poway, and it's always neat when they get to come and visit me. The San Diego Zoo Safari Park is just about 1,800 acres. What guests actually get to see is about 1/3 of actual space that we have. That is because there is endangered coastal sagebrush that is around our normal environment, and we actually will purposely not develop that land. The coolest thing about the safari park is that we have the ability to have these amazing multi-acre mixed species habitats. We call that the field, and that's kind of what we're going to be coming down to look at right now. In the mornings, coming in here with the sunrise and you watch all your animals, there's just nothing better. It's such a cool experience that I get to have, and I'm so excited that I get to have it. It's a lot of space for our animals to roam and be social and elicit so many behaviors. Being able to have 25 acre habitats, it's really cool to see all the animals being in different herds and how those herds interact. And we'll go a lot closer to everyone, because whenever they see the food, the candy man that I am, they will come running most of the time.
Our first stop of the day is to check in on a black buck from a distance. At most zoos, keepers have easy access to their animals, but at the safari park, the massive enclosures mean Alexa has to break out the binoculars to find the one she's looking for.
I will have to look specifically for her number, which she is 661, which means that she's the 661st black buck born at the safari park. So we have done fairly well with this species. The number tells you a lot about those animals. So I'm just going to try to find her real quick. I think she just may be laying down, which is completely fine. She does have some swelling on her front fetlock, and so we've been monitoring it and just making sure that it's not becoming too much of an issue. Sweet. We're in luck because I found her. She's doing good. Her swelling has gone down. She's with the herd. She's eating just fine. Normally what we'll do with that information is we will write it in our daily records, and then I'll also communicate to the vet staff.
It's the first of many stops along Alexa's day. Throughout the ride, she stops to do a bit of hay raking, toss some morning snacks to the many animals across the habitat, clean some water stations, and even hand feed some Thompson gazelle.
Thompsons are going to be calving soon, so we like to kind of keep a relationship with them to where we can check them for pregnancy status.
From there, we hop on the truck and run into some of the park's more colorful personalities.
Hi! So this is Botu. So you can see that prehensile lip. These guys, a lot of them call like plated rhinos. They're Indian rhinos, greater one-horn rhinos. They have many different names. They have a very different teeth structure, and that is to help them tear off browse or pluck grass. Come here.
It doesn't take long, though, for Botu to get a bit more entertained by the camera crew in the back than Alexa.
Botu! Stinky kid! Botu! Come here! Hi. Come here. Thank you. Little kid. And you can see Botu. He's like, no, you're more fun. What? Are you being a little stinker? Yeah.
With some silly rhinos fed, it's time we're off to our last stop of the day. Hanging out with some of the tallest hoof stock at the safari park, the giraffes. Alexa is working on a bit of enrichment for our spotted friends today.
These are two different types of browse that we're going to put together to allow them, because one is their absolute favorite, one they don't care for as much. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them together to where they kind of have to use their tongue and their sense of smell to manipulate the browse to get to the one they actually want.
Finally, with most of the food out, it's time for some training.
Theory. Oh, good job. And that noise that you're hearing is a clicker. You kind of like when you train your dog and your cat. We use that with these guys. It's just another cue to tell them whatever behavior they just did was good and that food is coming.
Alexa is Siri's primary wildlife care specialist, meaning it's up to her to be the one to teach Siri new behaviors and ensure she has them instilled and down before other keepers ask her to mimic the same behavior.
Target. Good job. Here we go. Yeah. Good. So that time I didn't have to ask her to actually go back. She will start to mimic my body positioning. So if I go backwards, she's gonna come forward. If I go back, if I go forward, she goes back. Good girl. So I'm just gonna end the session there. But she is still looking up and around and still calm. Good girl. And we're gonna give her a big reward for hanging out with me today. It's a massive head of lettuce. Who wouldn't want that?
It's been an eventful day at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. For me, it's a return to where this story began, except everything looks different now. Animals are thriving, keeper safety is a top priority, and conservation is front and center.
Sloths are seeing a bit of a hard time, folks, because of the loss of habitat.
It's a far cry from the early days we've heard about when zookeeping was more trial and error than science and strategy. Another major difference? Representation. As you likely noticed, both Michelle at Zoo Atlanta and Alexa here in San Diego are women, a reality that, as we've learned, was virtually unheard of in the keeper profession just a few decades ago. Today, that's changed dramatically and done a full 180, thanks in large part to the slow, steady progress driven by organizations like AAZK.
When I started in this profession, it was probably 75% male and 25% female. In the early 80s to mid 80s to early 90s, it flip-flopped.
I'm sure all of you can relate to a time where you thought about quitting the zoo at one point or another. I felt that a couple times in my career, and AZAC's always pulled me through.
The people in the profession today are primarily almost 83% female, college educated, very driven. There are some wonderful leaders in this profession, whether they be male or female.
So far with this project, I've focused on the history of AAZK, how it started and who helped it grow. But to understand its impact, I need to see where it's headed. So now, it's time for me to hop one last plane, to Omaha, Nebraska, to attend the AAZK National Conference and get to see just how big AZAC's impact on wildlife and the keeper profession truly is. The AAZK National Conference almost feels like a gathering of Congress. Hundreds of zookeepers fill the convention halls, each acting as a representative of their zoo. Among them, I'm reunited with Georgia AAZK President Michelle.
My favorite thing at conferences are the 15-minute paper presentations. We get so many cool ideas that can apply to a variety of species, and especially as a swing keeper, that's what I'm really into, is being able to take something that someone's doing with their prairie dogs in Texas and being able to apply it to an animal here at Zoo Atlanta.
Throughout the multi-day conference, I'm able to sit in on some of the various classes. Among them, I get to see discussions on working with a blind seal.
Usually our animals are just watching us. Jojo has to listen to us.
Treating an elephant for tuberculosis.
Being able to manage her in that would require a tremendous amount of coordination between keepers, zoo management, vets, public health agencies, so there's a lot of players in there.
And even research techniques to empower keepers to answer whether or not sharks recognize their favorite divers.
We care about our animals. We want to improve their well-being. This is a way to do that.
I always go to the simple aspect of what AAZK, our mission in plain terms, is to make good keepers better keepers.
Things I get to see here at the national conference level immediately translate back to things I've now gotten to see firsthand. I get to sit in on a class teaching different keeper training techniques for working with various hoofstocks. The same kind of techniques I saw Alexa perform with Thompson's gazelle, rhinos, and giraffes back at San Diego Zoo Safari Park.
Training was not even a concept when I started as an animal keeper in 1979. And now it's to the point where zookeepers are doing so much training at so different levels that the veterinary management of those animals become less complicated. Because it used to be, okay, when this primate needed to go to the hospital to get an exam, or this cat needed to go to be vaccinated, it was a process. Anesthetizing them, transporting them, and now the keepers train them, the animals present, they're inoculated, vaccinated, blood draws, etc. In 1979, absolutely unheard of. Today, absolutely routine. AAZK has taken those fundamental training things and just blown them apart. Some of the things that keepers think of just blow my mind as to what they can do today as opposed to what they couldn't do 20 years ago.
The conference isn't just about sharpening skills or sharing the latest in animal care. It's also about caring for the keepers themselves.
When I started 10 years ago, there are things about where the profession is now that never occurred to me. I never thought that we would be in a place where, the forefront of a lot of keeper things would be related to, the mental health and well-being and in the diversity of the field.
Those of us who are pet owners or who raise animals know how tough it feels when they're gone.
This feeling of loss can be extra tough for zookeepers who form close bonds with the animals that they care for.
Hi, Bubbles! Hi, baby!
I think back to the closeness I saw between Rochelle and Bubbles, the deep love that can form between a keeper and the animals in their care. It's a bond that reminds me of my own silly beagle at home. Their presence does more than make us smile. It grounds us, soothes us, and connects us. It goes beyond companionship. It's an emotional bond. Those of us outside zoology know the grief that comes with losing a beloved pet. For keepers, the loss of an animal they've cared for carries that same weight. The connection is real, and so is the toll when it's broken. That's why AZAC's work today goes beyond innovating animal care. It's focused equally on mental health, empowering keepers to endure loss and overcome burnout.
Animals are very intelligent. They can go off of your energy. So if you're feeling down, your animals know that, and then it could cause your animals to feel down.
Alongside that commitment, this year's conference highlights another pressing issue. AAZK leaders are bringing an increased focus on improving diversity and inclusion within the keeper profession.
One of the big things that I've learned just in recent years is how important it is for people from underrepresented groups to be able to see themselves in the people that they're learning from. There's a better connection that's built from that. So the zookeeper profession is trying to ensure that they improve that, because we're able to reach millions of people each year by being a zookeeper and being out there and being the face and the voice for these animals in a lot of cases. So by having a more diverse workforce that better represents the population as a whole, we're able to do a way better job of educating and hopefully encouraging conservation efforts for these animals.
Improving conservation efforts is also where keepers see their work pay off most clearly. One of the biggest highlights at the conference is watching the impact of chapter fundraisers ripple out through the organization's many conservation partners.
Our mission is save the cheetah, change the world, keep them living free in the wild.
We love AZAC because it is just passionate keepers. We love the fact that we've been approached by keepers that say, hey, what more can we do for penguins?
We have about 35 active projects across 10 African countries.
AZAC brings out people to visit Lewa, learn from the ground, the experiences we do, how we handle animals.
The more we can, engage the keepers and have them know that this is a tie to your efforts. You're not just a zookeeper doing husbandry and taking care of animals. We want you talking to the community. We want you to be front and center and let people know that not only do I work with these species, but I'm trying to help save them.
Through AAZK exchange programs, months from now, some keepers might find themselves halfway across the globe, researching elephant migration or working with African farmers to prevent cheetah poaching. But before traveling the world, they get a chance to see animal behavior up close, right here in Omaha. Zoo Day is a tradition at every AAZK conference when the host city invites keepers into its zoo for a hands-on look at their animal care techniques. And Zoo Day at Omaha's Henry Doorly Zoo has keepers spreading out across the facility for lots of hands-on learning. I get to see things discussed in the classroom come to life as I witness keepers work on training behaviors with a pair of snow leopards and one seriously adorable sloth bear. But the real highlight, I'm invited on a behind-the-scenes tour of the zoo's Desert Dome. After a bit of hiking, we get a first-hand look at a variety of reptiles, and then move on to learn about the anti-venom kept on site to protect keepers working with some of their slithery co-workers, along with the innovative ways the Henry Doorly Zoo is helping support reptile conservation. It's all fun and games until we round a corner and come to face with a group of hungry alligators. As luck would have it, we've timed our visit perfectly for feeding time. A few of the keepers ask if I want to toss them a snack. I politely declined that tantalizing offer. This one's definitely better left to the pros. Between sloth bears, snow leopards, alligators, and my occasional spiking heart rate, it was definitely a wild day at the zoo. But for the keepers, it was a chance to get a fresh perspective and bring new ideas home to improve care for their own zoo animals. With Zoo Day wrapped up, it's time to celebrate those fresh perspectives as AAZK holds a special award ceremony honoring keepers for everything from conservation work to innovative animal care. It's also definitely not a boring award ceremony. After all, where else are award winners met with gibbon yells? But beyond the cheers, even now the past comes alive. Every AZAC award named for a keeper, whether a former leader or someone who quietly kept the organization alive after my grandfather, they remain a part of this organization's legacy. Even if I'll never know all of their stories, their impact is everywhere in this room. And one of the most emotional impacts for those at the conference comes with the recognition of Nikki Peepers, a member from the Los Angeles Zoo, who is honored posthumously with the Meritorious Achievement Award after passing away from cancer just before the conference. There aren't many dry eyes in the room as she gets a standing ovation. And then I learn of another loss, one that hits especially hard. AZK founder Ken Willingham. Ken was the first person I reached out to when I began this journey, hoping to uncover more about my grandfather.
Somebody always told me you're supposed to tell a joke whenever you get up someplace, so I can only tell a dirty one. Dick Sweeney.
As I listened to the keepers and leaders at the AZK conference, teaching classes, pushing the boundaries of wildlife care, and working to protect our planet, I see the spirit of both Ken and my grandfather living on in every keeper I meet.
Sometimes people remember a little bit of the bad stuff and they kind of forget the good. We're all brothers and sisters under the skin.
After leaving Connecticut, my grandfather returned to San Diego, where he spent the rest of his career. Just before retiring, he reunited with the other AZK founders to celebrate the organization's 20th anniversary in 1987. It was the last time many of them would all be in the same room.
My dad passing in 2001 and then my mom a year after that. That was very hard on me. I miss them both every single day. They poured their hearts into their work at the zoo, but it's just really comforting to see how much of their legacy lives on with the next generation of zookeepers.
For years after he passed, all I had to remember my grandfather's time as a keeper was an old VHS tape of the 1987 AZAC conference and a few old photographs. But now I've uncovered so much more. Like many of us, not every dream he had came true. He faced struggles and setbacks, but through it all, he never stopped believing that zookeepers could change the world. Today, more often than not, we're shown the worst people in animal care.
And then the list goes on. Ow, son of a bitch!
It's the HBO docuseries being billed as the new Tiger King, and Chimp Crazy is directed by the same filmmaker.
Because they make for a sensational headline. But those aren't at all the people I've met. The real animal care leaders, the ones in accredited zoos and aquariums caring for animals every single day, they're among the hardest working people out there. They do all they do, not for fame or fortune, but because they believe in something bigger, making the world better not just for wildlife, but for all of us.
Because you gotta walk the walk. If you're going to go up there and, care about these wild animals and tell the public that they need to care and make efforts to protect these animals in their wild habitats, you can't get up there and do that if you're not going to take that messaging home with you yourself. These keepers care of that level that they're demonstrating, and then that another 10 times over.
I started this film hoping to learn more about my grandfather's life, but along the way, I found something bigger. a community of people who truly represent the best of humanity. I'm finishing this film as AZK approaches its 50th National Conference. Maybe you're watching it premiere there. Or maybe it's decades later and something led you here, searching for a deeper understanding of what it means to care for wildlife. Wherever you are, whenever you are, the story remains the same. My grandfather may have helped lay the foundation, but it's the hands and hearts of countless others over the years that have carried it forward.
What do you think the zookeeping profession will look like 10 or even 20 years from now?
Truthfully, it's tough to say. Because I'm sure if you ask somebody 10 or 20, I mean, when I started 10 years ago, there are things about where the profession is now that never occurred to me. The groups of people that I'm working with that are new keepers now compared to where I was 10 years ago, come in with such a unique and different mindset that I'm not sure if I can accurately predict exactly where it's going to be in 10 years. But if the first 10 years of my career are any indication, wherever it goes, it'll be really impressive to be there with it.
Even as AZK looks towards the future, the legacy of my grandfather and so many others who helped shape and elevate the keeper profession continues to resonate. Many incredible people key to its success may no longer be with us, but their impact is felt every single day.
Professional development for today's keeper is only limited by the keeper. There are no more roadblocks, such as those we encountered.
That legacy lives on through the keepers, and even through everyday folks doing our part. Anyone who fights for conservation, for those creatures who don't have a voice, or those who have an incredibly loud one. Take the time. Visit your local zoo. Come face to face with nature and the animals worth fighting to protect. Bowl for some rhinos. Have a pizza for the pachyderms or tacos for tamarins, so that by the time your grandchildren are telling your story, we make sure these incredible animals, and more importantly, this planet, are still here. I guarantee if you come across the type of people I've met along this journey, you'll find some of the most empathetic and compassionate people in the world who will leave you inspired to do your part and care for every living creature, from the massive elephants to the little lizards that we share this earth with. I've spent so long trying to piece this story together, and now with nearly everything in place, I realize the final piece belongs to him. His words, written decades ago in one of the first AZK newsletters, still say it best.
On several different occasions since the beginning of our organization, I have been approached with the question, why did you use the word keeper in your name? I have a simple reply, because that is what we are. It has been suggested that it's time for the zookeeper to search for a modern title. Why? Is the word keeper downgrading? Webster defines it as protector or guardian. What could more aptly describe our profession? We are the protectors of wildlife, guardians of animal life. And this is the sense in which the word keeper should reflect. Our present title, as is, can demand as much respect as any fancy technological nomenclature. The word keeper is synonymous with the field of zoology, and it has remained intact because of that simple, direct description of what we do. We keep, protect, and guard the species and specimens of wildlife in our charge. And a zookeeper, by any other name, will always be a keeper.
There's a fella here named Conrad Grayson that worked here as a keeper. I think he's still trying to take bombs apart now. I don't know. You still doing that? What do you do? You still walk up in with a hammer and jump back?